Thank you all for coming along and being part of the Listen It's Lifelong event. We hope through this event that you will take away some of adoption's past, present and future. Now over to Lindsay to introduce our first speaker.
I'll pass over to Sarah.
Yeah. Thanks very much. This is Peter. How do you pronounce your name?
Yeah, Capamola Moore.
Capamola.
Capamola. Yeah, Capamola. Yeah.
Capamola. I didn't want to introduce you
Capamola.
without introducing it properly. So this is Peter Capamola, who's from the Adoptee Rights Australia, and Peter has kindly taken his time to come and talk to us in Scotland about the National Australian Apology and what has changed actually 10 years on. So over to you now, Peter. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm really pleased to be here. Nervous, but pleased to be here. I'm going to give a PowerPoint presentation, but those who don't know me, I'm a late Discovery adoptee. I'm a proud Kamilaroi, that's an Australian Aboriginal man, also of Italian heritage and Scottish heritage. In fact, my original birth name was Peter Macmillan, and Macmillan's from the Isle of Skye. So if there's any relatives out there, I haven't set foot on Scottish land yet, but that's definitely in the future. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen and put up the presentation. I want to start with an acknowledgement to country, which is what we do traditionally here when we're speaking on country. And country here is an Aboriginal country is more than just country. It's a whole spiritual knowledge and that of country, which is you're encompassing. So anyway, without further ado, I'll share the screen and this PowerPoint. There we go. Okay. As you see the map there, that's most of the mobs of
Wait a second, Peter.
Gives you an idea how many tribes there are. Today, whilst on Aboriginal land, footsteps that are tens of thousands of years old, I acknowledge those traditional owners whose cultures, customs have nurtured this land since men and women awoke from great dreaming. I also honour the presence of those ancestors who still reside in the landscape and whose spirituality flows through all creation. I pay respect and acknowledge all elders, past, present and emerging. I pay respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be listening to this today or in the future. I would like to thank Sam and, of course, Fiona for inviting me to be present here today. I would also like to thank Sharon White, committee member of Adoptee Rights Australia, who prepared the much larger version and analysis of this subject that I've plagiarised so blatantly with her approval. Without Sharon's and the other committee members and all our members' support, I would not be here today. I am truly humbled to be invited to speak here. Now, today's talk is on the Senate inquiry of 2013, the relevant recommendations and government response 10 years on from the apology. Did anything change? I'd just like to make it clear that I am no expert on the apology. The mothers and adoptees that worked so diligently over many years, decades in fact, to bring the Senate inquiry and apology to fruition are the true experts of lived experience through that time. I'm a late Discovery adoptee of just 6.5 years. I came 4 years after the apology and these events, Therefore, I have no first-hand knowledge. I am but the storyteller. I would like to play a short excerpt of the Prime Minister Julia Gillard's national apology from the 21st of March 2013. I would like to warn anyone who hasn't seen these, and even those who have seen this before, that this can be quite traumatic. It is for me, and I've watched this many, many times. But I think it's worth starting at this point, and with the dreams and aspirations that came about with this apology and the recognition and validation that came with it. I'll play it now.
House of Representatives, today, this Parliament, on behalf of the Australian people, takes responsibility and apologises for the policies and practices that force the separation of mothers from their babies, which created a lifelong legacy of pain and suffering. We acknowledge the profound effects of these policies and practices on fathers, and we recognise the hurt these actions cause to brothers and sisters, grandparents, partners, and extended family members. We deplore the shameful practices that denied you, the mothers, your fundamental rights and responsibilities to love and care for your children. You were not legally or socially acknowledged as their mothers, and you were yourselves deprived of care and support. To you, the mothers who were betrayed by a system that gave you no choice and subjected you to manipulation, mistreatment, and malpractice, we apologise. We say sorry to you, the mothers who were denied knowledge of your rights, which meant you could not provide informed consent. You were given false assurances. You were forced to endure the coercion and brutality of practices that were unethical, dishonest, and in many cases illegal. And the apology continues. We know you have suffered enduring effects from these practices forced on you by others, for the loss, the grief, the disempowerment, the stigmatisation, and the guilt. We say sorry. To each of you who were adopted or removed, who were led to believe your mother had rejected you, and who were denied the opportunity to grow up with your family and community of origin and to connect with your culture, we say sorry. We apologise to the sons and daughters who grew up not knowing how much you were wanted and loved. We acknowledge that many of you still experience a constant struggle with identity, uncertainty, and loss, and feel a persistent tension between loyalty to one family and yearning for another. To you, the fathers who were excluded from the lives of your children and deprived of the dignity of recognition on your children's birth records, we say sorry. We acknowledge your loss and grief. We recognise that the consequences of forced adoption practices continue to resonate through many, many lives. To you, the siblings, grandparents, partners, and other family members who have shared in the pain and suffering of your loved ones, who were unable to share their lives, we say sorry. Many are still grieving. Some families will be lost to one another forever. To those of you who face the difficulties of reconnecting with family and establishing ongoing relationships, we say sorry. We offer this apology in the hope that it will assist your healing and in order to shine a light on a dark period of our nation's history. To those who have fought for the truth to be heard, we hear you now.
Yeah. Let that sink in. Sorry, I just All right. So that apology had so much hope attached to it. And almost instantly, much of that was taken away. And I'm going to ad-lib a bit here, but whilst those mothers and adoptees had worked so hard to be recognised, and that should have been the news of the night, should have been front page, should have been on TV, when the photographers and journalists and cameras were all poised to outside the Parliament House, and there was women who were crying on the lawns of Parliament House. Two members of the government decided this was an opportune time, and one of the members was my local member, the opportune time to come out to the media and announce that they were going to roll Julia Gillard for the leadership. So they stole the opportunity for recognition at that crucial moment. And I think, as history has shown, that was a theme that was recurring. And so on the 15th of November 2010, the Senate referred the Community Affairs References Committee an inquiry into forced adoption policies and practices. The inquiry must report by the 30th of April 2011. So this is the forerunner of before the apology, how the apology came about. There are only two terms of reference. One, the role of government, if any, in contributing to forced adoptions, and two, the potential role of the Commonwealth in developing a national framework to assist states and territories to address the consequences for mothers, their families, and children who are subject to forced adoption policies. On the timeline, on the 21st of March 2013, the apology was made. The government response stated, the national framework will be progressed through the Standing Council on Community and Disability Services. April 2013, Attorney General's meeting of the Standing Council on Law and Justice agreed they would consider non-legislated changes that could provide greater harmonisation for the access to birth information. December 2014, in the final report of the Forced Adoptions Implementation Working Group, under harmonisation of records, stated, now this is a working group that was formed to assist to implement these changes. They were set up, and there was a number of stakeholders, including adoptees and mothers, on that group. And they said ruling out legislative amendment is contrary to the needs and interests of people affected by forced adoptions. If those needs and interests require legislative amendment, that is what should occur. So already we've got odds of what they want to happen. On the 7th of September, and this is significant, there was a change of government from Labor to Liberal. And the new Prime Minister was Tony Abbott. What that clip, even the extended clip that I just showed you, I showed you 5 minutes for the 20-minute apology. Tony Abbott spoke after that and was booed off the stage by the mothers and adoptees. So there was a change of a government, and he became the Prime Minister. The 25th of September 2013, the Forced Adoptions Issues and Directions Working Group was set up to develop terms of reference to guide the work. A key element of the framework was to be the harmonisation of birth records and reconnection services between states and territories. So they're talking about bringing all the records into a central place to be accessed. On the 13th of December 2013, the decision was made by what was then known as COAG, the Prime Minister, State and Territory Premiers and Chief Ministers, that the Standing Council on Community and Disability Services would be discontinued. So they're unwinding it. The 27th of June 2014, the Standing Council on Community and Disability Services agreed on a new governance structure. This structure did not include the forced adoption issues and directions working group and its activities. Ad hoc work can still be progressed with states and territories at officer level, depending on the issue. In other words, they divulged themselves of the responsibility and said, oh, the states can work it out ad hoc, state by state, issue by issue. They just walked away from it. It's in almost every case where the oversight was promised was withdrawn, there has been no progression at all. Oops. The majority of undertakings made in the Commonwealth government response have not been implemented. Some that have been implemented are partial and often quite different to the original intention of the original agreement. Recommendations 1, which was basically the harmonisation and the collective, that was disbanded, which, recommendations 10, 13, 15 and 19 were directly progressed by the Standing Council and Committee on Disability Services. The national framework, which was recommendation 1, itself covered the majority of these. So without recommendation 1, everything else just fell in a heap. None of these were progressed due to the above actions. A national framework to address the consequences of forced adoption was not progressed. One of the key elements of this recommendation, number 13, harmonisation to ensure consistency and provide better access, also not done. Recommendations 1 and 13. It appears unlikely that financial contributions have been sought from state and territory governments, institutions and organisations that were involved in the practice of placing children of single mothers for adoption. But if it had been done, then this information needs to be provided transparently, which it hasn't been. Recommendation number 10. Harmonisation of birth register. The Attorneys General decided in April 2013 that there would only be non-legislative change. This was recommended against by the Forced Adoption Implementation Working Party. But even this non-legislative change has not been progressed because of the discontinuation of the Standing Council on Community and Disability Services. Sorry to be giving you all this bad news, but I know a lot of people look to Australia as a beacon of hope, and we'll continue into it, but this is all in validation. After this big validating event, it was all downhill from there. No principles to govern post-adoption information have been agreed or implemented by states and territories. Adopted people in New South Wales presently are waiting up to 2.5 years for their information. I just had an adoptee who was a late Discovery Adoptee at 76, I believe, has just received some information she sought 6 years ago. She'd forgotten she'd even applied for it. Inconsistencies between states and territories means crucial life-affecting legislation around vetoes. Now, I don't know if the vetoes exist in UK. They exist in some of the states in New South Wales, in Australia. In New South Wales, prior to, I think it's the 26th of October 1990, vetoes exist. Post that, vetoes no longer exist. A veto can be brought about between either the biological mother or the and I use the term biological just for context, or the adoptee. There can be contact veto, which prohibits contact to anyone, any relative on their side of things. And if it was brought in by a adoptee, well, then it could be anyone in the adoptive family. It's basically a gag order. That inhibits the right to information, access to information on relatives, among others, are dependent on where someone was adopted. Recommendation 15. A statement of principles for access to personal information was to have been developed with non-government organisations, and a past adoptive practices consultative forum was to be developed, supported by a national consultation group, which included people with lived experience. Recommendation 19. Father's names on birth certificates. Recommendation 14. This is my personal gripe, as some of you will know. On the 6th of June 2014, the Attorney General informed the chair of the Forced Adoption Implementation Working Group that this issue had been resolved. They said the states have a process to do this already. We don't need to resolve this. It's already been resolved. For those who don't know, I just won a 6-year battle against the New South Wales birth, deaths and marriages in the administrative tribunal, trying to get my father's name on my original birth certificate. I had been trying basically since the day I found out who I was, and found out that my father's name did not appear on my original birth certificate. And I have records of requesting that information. And for 6 years, I was never given a straight answer as to why that couldn't happen, despite numerous statutory declarations from my mother. One of the policies that they have in place is that I have to have an accredited DNA test done between me and my father, who, like many other adoptees, my father's deceased. There is no way of getting my father's DNA to get a match. One adoptee that I know, when he went to the counter of the New South Wales Birth, Deaths and Marriages and asked for that information, they said the only way you're going to get that is if you dig your father up and get his DNA. As blunt as that. So here we have the Attorney General informing the chair of the Forced Adoption Implementation Working Group that no, we've got the processes in place. It has not been resolved. There is no procedure to allow father's name to be put on birth certificates in accordance with the intent that was agreed on to in principle at recommendation 14. Recommendations 11 and 12 and the reparation schemes were noted, not agreed to, but the government should lead the states and territories on the establishment of funding financial reparation schemes. There has been no reparation for adoptees. No one has been paid any redress. There is no redress scheme. There is recently, after an inquiry in Victoria into the responses to historical forced adoptions, came out of that was a redress scheme for the mothers, but the adoptees were left out of that. So it's not happening. There's little bits and pieces. I don't know where that's going to go. This was a recommendation from the final report of the Forced Adoption Implementation Working Group. Sadly to say, so what has happened in 10 years? Sadly to say, not much. Family Advocacy and Support Service, FAS, and the Australian Psychological Society, APS, that is training to health professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists, seem to be the only outcomes beside apologies. The APS has refused to explain to Adoptee Rights Australia the vast amount of monies, and I'm talking about millions, received have been spent. They just flat out refuse to any clarity whatsoever. Because as FAS addressed the needs of those affected, recommendations 8, affordable professional support and counselling services. 16, family tracing and support. 17, extend find and connect services, which was a service that was provided to forgotten Australians. Forgotten Australians are those who are in institutions. They have a much better support structure than what adoptees have. Not begrudging them that, but this was a recommendation that where they would extend that to include adoptees, and it never happened. And all government and non-government organisations involved in forced adoptions establish projects to identify all records still in their possession. That whilst there is some openness of records, we often get them redacted, or we get that same universal story, flood or fire, phantom flood or fire, that no one can actually pinpoint a newspaper clipping as to when that actually happened. It's a universal, what we would call here in Australia a furphy. Just to explain, that furphy was a brand of a water cart in the I think it was the First World War, and it's like standing around the water cooler and telling stories and tell a furphy. Family tracing support for services, FAS, because there is nothing else. Any service is discretionary. Eligibility and what can be provided is not transparent. So, the level of support is, I guess it's conditional on budget, and there's not enough money put into it. And they argue they don't want to put any money because it's not being used, and it doesn't seem to have occurred to them that it's not being used, not because it's not wanted, but it's not providing the service that adoptees require. And I'm not saying, that applies to all adoptees. Some adoptees do find those services, helpful for them, but many others do not. And many others need a higher level of psychiatric care than what a counselling can provide, but they can't afford it, and there's no funding for us. I do acknowledge there are other state-funded organisations who provide budget-constrained limited counselling services as well. Was the apology worth it? Is an apology with no concrete commitments with a rigid timeline just lip service? Well, whilst I generally agree with that statement, I do have to say that no matter how many times I watch that video of Julia Gillard giving the apology, I am moved. My eyes well up and I am awash with emotion. It is validation that we all crave for. It's the stark reality of what happened to us and to our mothers. I have said to several inquiries that forced adoption is not my trauma. It is my mother's trauma. I am here due to forced adoption, but it is the adoption per se that is my primary trauma. I am very sensitive to pro-adoptionists who gaslight us and say, oh, that was in the past. We now have open adoption, as if separation trauma and identity loss are determined by illegality. My argument is that I was in open adoption since 1990, but no one bothered to tell me. No adopted parent, no adopted aunt or uncle, no adopted cousin, and most of all, no government who should have a duty of care to inform me of my adoptive status. I guess I probably ended a little early here. I put this together in a hurry, and I didn't get a chance to read through and see, but I am very open to questions, and no matter whether they're all related to this or not.
Well done, Peter. I thought that was amazing. Well done. You explained how the story for you guys have been, and just taken us along that journey and showed, where these points are, where things have happened, and just absolutely amazing. I just want to say a few things before I open up to the panel, and because I'm sure they've got loads of questions. But one of the things is we don't have gag orders in the UK. So yeah, I thought I just wanted to kind of to point that out, that there's slight differences between us. And the other thing as well is the thing with DNA. We have had a commercial DNA used in the UK. It's not easy to change or add names on birth certificates, and we touched on it slightly with Gary yesterday. But I just wanted to point that out. We do have a difference there. We're not asking anybody to be going and digging up relatives anytime soon. But one of the things I would just point out, because it's a great subject that you pointed out there, and you don't need DNA to amend a birth certificate if somebody's willing to, they're still alive, and not tell the truth. However, you can't do it for adoptees. So yes, it's a real gripe of mine as well. Yes, I completely agree.
Well, that was one of the findings in the case that I brought against New South Wales Birth, Deaths and Marriages. The senior member, on behalf of it's not actually a tribunal, it's a single judge or a senior member, they call him. He said that my ancestry DNA was evidentiary. That had to be assessed. It couldn't be just dismissed. So that was very clear. And he also said that in paragraph 75, that was quite a long judgment, that I provided the most up-to-date factual evidence available to New South Wales Birth, Deaths and Marriages, and they had to accept that. Now, I've linked this to there is a national Aboriginal birth certificate program here in Australia, because a lot of Aboriginal people do not have birth certificates, and this is part of what we call closing the gap, to try and close the gap between Aboriginal people and non-Aboriginal people, and that by not having a birth certificate, they can't get a driver's license, they can't get employment. So they basically said to them, give us the information you have. And at the end of the day, that's all you can say is, well, I know who my mother and father is, and that's who they are. I don't have anything to back that up. That is the best and most accurate available information available to New South Wales Birth, Deaths and Marriages, or the other states. And that's accepted. So there's already a pathway to do that.
Yeah.
And this is what we're asking the government, saying you have a pathway. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel, do something that's so far left field. You've already done this, and you should be doing this for adoptees as well.
Absolutely. Making something reasonable. Yeah. It's a reasonable request. I'm going to open it up to the panel, because I know this is such a subject that's so deep to you, and it's such a personal link, but I'm going to open up to the panel to see if there's any questions, and I'm going to go to the Q&A as well and have a little look. So I'll leave you with Sarah. Sarah's got unmuted, so there we go.
Thank you, sir. That was amazing. Thank you so much. I have to say, when the apology went just now, I had to take myself off camera. I just found that far too emotional. And you're right. I think that there gets to a point where the government have to kind of stand up and say enough is enough. There has to be a point where the government have to take responsibility for these things. Because then once they start taking responsibility, the stigma of adoptees starts to fall away. And I think what they did in Australia was like, I can't even, it just, I don't know if one of the other panelists wants to come in and have a chat with you about that, but honestly, I'm so moved by what you've written today, and thank you so much for your presentation. But I do feel absolutely 100% the government have to take responsibility, and I don't know how you feel about that, Peter, in terms of your
Absolutely.
journey through this.
Yeah, absolutely. They need to take responsibility. They, as I said, they've got a duty of care. How many others are there like me who don't know that they're adopted? Same in the UK, in Scotland, around the world. I was having a conversation with Fiona the other day about this, and I said about questions being the answers. And we often provide facts, and then they just turn off. And the salesman in my image says, ask questions. And my question is, with someone who's not adopted, go, do you have the right to know who your parents are?
Yeah.
And it's asking the question that you know the answer.
Yeah.
And the answer is, well, of course I do.
Yeah.
Well, do I have the right to know who my parents are? And if not, why not?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why am I being treated like a second class citizen? You know, these are questions of standing in someone else's shoes, stand in my shoes, and see how you feel. We maybe need to look at doing things with a bit of a different approach than just appealing to them. Appeal to them in a different way. Get them to concede, to agree with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Because then the language around all of this is never going to really change unless the government start to embrace that language, and that can allow everybody to start to heal, I think. So Dawn had her hand up. Do you want to go, Dawn? Take yourself off mute.
There you go. Sorry. Hi, Peter. Thank you for being here today. You made some great points yesterday, and we weren't able to. It's my fault. Stay up with it. Excuse me. Thank you for showing us the clip. I had seen it, and it still knocks you sideways. And the point that the over and over again about the mysterious floods and fires that keep happening to our records. It's the same here. We just seem to have an abnormal amount of fires and floods and disasters that happen here too. The acknowledgement of the fathers are left out, and we could line up the same issues. And as you were talking, and when you first said about your link to land, your link to the ancestors, I think that was just something I'd never heard, and that in itself, there's so much of your life, of our lives, of every adoptee's life that isn't and is never going to be there. And as for saying things are different now in open adoption, it's nothing's changed. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. And all of the things, it's lies, it's the constant change, it's the constant, obviously the apologies that, like in Scotland, that mean nothing. That I'm not Scottish, I don't think. But it's like when Nicola Sturgeon gave the apology, it meant nothing, because obviously Scotland wasn't in control of that at the time. And it's the Australian apology and saying all that, and then putting all the people through more, all the people who have suffered through more trauma for nothing. It's just that dangling the carrot and giving everybody another whack at the same time. I just think it's appalling. I actually think it's appalling. And as you say about the questions are the answers. And that is one of the best statements I've heard yet, is when you say to people who are unadopted, do you know, have the right to know who your mum and dad are? They wouldn't even think about it. They wouldn't even think about it. And yet you nailed that. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is one thing, one comment. I'm sorry, I'll have to steal it. So thank you. I can see if he's got a hand up, but you absolutely cracked it, that one. But thank you, Peter, for being here. Thank you so much. Thank you.
We've had a
Thank you
question.
for your kind words.
We've had a question quickly come in, and I've just seen it, so I don't know how long it's been sitting there. Thank you very much, Peter. I would like to ask, what advice do you have for Sam, given we are 10 years behind the Australian apology? I'm thinking of our engagement with the Scottish Parliament. This is somebody who's obviously part of our team, so we'll know who she is, and how we get to the three asks. We've to meet the three asks. I do not want a Scottish apology to lead to similar disappointments. Wonderfully put.
Yeah, keep the pedal to the metal. I think what happened, and look, I as I said, I came in 4 years after, this had happened, and I think after the apology, everyone just took a breather and went, "Oh well, yeah, that's it. We got the apology. That's fine," and relaxed. And I know I'm the biggest procrastinator there is. I've got too many things going on all at once. And but yeah, we do put things off, and I think we just have to hit while the iron's hot. When the iron's hot, just keep pushing that poker in.
Keep getting our voices out there.
Yep, and I don't care where anyone comes from. If they're having I don't care whether they're part of our organisations, part of someone else's, whoever's arrow finds a chink in the armor, I don't care. That's great, whoever does it, and wherever it comes around, I think the more arrows, the better.
Yeah. Amazing. Lindsay, you've got a question. You're going to get a question in.
Yeah, hi Peter. I'm looking at questions that people have been putting into the Q&A, and the one that is chiming with me that had alerted my curiosity was to ask about your background, as in literally the photograph that we're looking at behind you.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well,
it was put by one of the attendees who asked who are all the beautiful
that's my
people.
grandmother, that little girl there.
All right.
Ribbon in her hair.
Yeah.
That's my grandmother. The other lady over there is her oldest sister.
Mm-hmm.
And the man next to her is my great-grandfather. And the other man is his brother. And the lady behind me, that's his sister and her child.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, she was a victim of domestic violence and was murdered by her husband, which was quite extremely tragic when I read that when I was doing the research. But it is a great photo, and it's I'm so lucky to have that photo.
Thank you. I mean, it means so much. It's like I can feel connections between you and a photograph of real people, but you have the photograph and you're a real person. Thank you.
And as someone said to me the other day, I'm in the photograph.
You are.
Although I'm coloured. I'm photoshopping.
Is there any more questions? Can we see any more questions just before we have a wee break?
There's a very specific one, which is in the chat, saying, I'm wondering about the Australian Psychological Society and why they are not accountable for public funds. Surely records must be somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we've asked, there's so many things we can do and so many things we can focus on. Yeah, I just sort of noticed Sharon White is in the audience, and she knows more about that document than I do. As I said, I plagiarized it, and I did get her permission. But yeah, she knows the detail, and she says Baz isn't accountable either. So, yeah.
Do you know what?
Not
As
to
a
us.
community, we're a very lucky community, because there's just so many of us actually out there who look at very, very specific things, and those adoptees, they know that those people who are looking at those, and in the community, they're looking at very specific things. They know it inside out. It's amazing. What people that we heard from yesterday as well, it's just
Yeah, I was speaking to Sharon earlier, and I told her about that yesterday, and she's waiting for the recording to come out to.
Davey is online.
Yeah.
For anybody who was here, Davey has posted his. You can find that on our media pages. But yes, it was a very it was a really emotional day, but one of great importance, and I think today's going to really shine a light on where we need to go moving forward as a community. And as a group, Sarah, do you want to ask another quick question, and then we'll wrap up and we'll have a half an hour break. Everybody can get a cup of tea and a wee sit down, and possibly some relaxing movements, and then we'll start again at 10:30.
Okay, well, somebody's actually just left a message on the Q&A and said, with all that's happened in the last 10 years, Peter, how do you feel about the apology now?
I hadn't thought much about the apology other than just, there's no concrete, recommendations and concrete actions, and it's lip service. But having listened to it again while I cut that video up, I realized it has value. It has value in validating that at least we had, someone heard us, even if it was for a short band of time. We were being listened to and we were heard. And I believe Julia Gillard did hear us. But it's just the way things happen that had that government continued, well, we may have been further down the track than we are now. I think that's probably best.
And do you think that if other governments followed suit, it would then things would start to change?
I do. I think it's like anything, that we've seen great changes in our lifetimes, and all sorts of things from apartheid and different things that our parents would never have thought would have changed. But the Berlin Wall, all those things. So
never say never, right? Never say never.
Never say never. Exactly. So, I'm quite positive that we are getting traction. I've seen that. I'm very positive about what we're going to, see in the future, and that we're
I see that as well.
We're just getting steam, one person at a time. I like a lot of other adoptees, I can't not talk people, but I'll give you a little hint. I don't say straight out I'm adopted most times now. I say, if it comes up in conversation, something comes up and I find the in, I say, I have 2 birth certificates. And they look at you and go, what? Yeah, I have 2 birth certificates. They cancelled my original birth certificate, and they fabricated a fake one that said I was born to adoptive parents. And instead of getting the usual, when you say you're adopted, and they go, isn't that wonderful? Did you have a good life? And and when I say it that way, they go, well, that's not right. And I go, no, it's not. Okay, and they still do it today. And they go, what? They still do it today? I said, this is the foundation of adoption. This foundation is built on cancelling your birth certificate and giving you a new identity.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I'm going to use that in future.
one
Yeah.
person at a time.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I see what you mean, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to
Yeah.
say personally and from the team, thank you so much. And the comments that have come in is just, it's amazing. You know, you've spoken to so many and really given a real background into not only how you ended up in where you guys are, but also why personally it means so much to you, and where those things should be amended to recognize these things that you passionately talk about. I'm so grateful. So thank you so much.